Hey romance writers, welcome back to Write with Heart. Today we're going to be talking about NaNoWriMo's over. Now what? Here are 7 steps on what to do once you've completed NaNoWriMo. Whew, what a month, eh? You took a crazy challenge to write 50,000 words in a month, and now we've come to the end. Except once you hit November 30th and you finish, you're not actually done. This project with your book is not over. So today we're going to be talking about your next steps once you finish NaNoWriMo. So the very first thing that you should do when you finish NaNoWriMo on November 30th, or maybe you'll wait till December 1st, is celebrate. I once read a statistic that said 81% of people say they want to write a book, but almost none of them put their butt in chair and write. But you did. Even if you didn't hit the 50,000 word mark, if you took the challenge and put your butt in chair and started a book, you're already ahead of the game and you should celebrate. And once you finish celebrating, the next thing you need to do is take stock of what you've written. During NaNoWriMo, there's very little time to do anything but add words to the page. But now that it's over, you can take a breath and then figure out what's going on with your book. Now, at this point, I'm not talking about revision or editing. I'm actually talking about things that you need to do before you get to that point. Some of the things to look at include: did you complete a draft? Were you able to get a full book into 50,000 words during NaNoWriMo? For many authors, they don't. They might hit 50,000 words, but there's still more story that needs to be written. And if you didn't finish your story, how much left do you have to write? Where are you in the story? Have you written the first 2 acts and you just need to finish that 3rd act? Maybe you've written out of order and you need to go back and write something earlier in the book. Did your book veer off the path that you originally intended it to be on? Now, veering off the path isn't necessarily bad. It can be fun. It might lead to a better story. On the other hand, it could be a sign that you've completely gotten off track. So if your book has veered into a different direction, you have to decide if you want to keep going in that direction, or do you need to get back to your plot and retool what you've written to better fit what you originally intended. Now, if it does turn out that you have more that needs to be written, the third thing you need to do is to make a plan to actually finish writing your book. Now, personally, I think December 1st is one of the most dangerous times for NaNoWriMo participants and their manuscripts. You've run this crazy sprint, and now you want to take a break and not put your running shoes on again. And the problem with that is if you set your writing aside and you get out of the habit, now your manuscript is at risk of languishing unfinished forever. The thing is, you want to keep writing, but you do not have to do it at that NaNoWriMo pace. One of the great benefits of NaNoWriMo is that it can help you figure out a writing schedule that works best for you. And if you have discovered that, I would encourage you to stick with it and finish your book. But if the pace was too fast and furious to maintain beyond that 30 days, you can create a new schedule and a new routine for writing. NaNoWriMo should have given you some ideas on what your peak writing times are and your sweet spot for a single session word count. For example, maybe you found it really easy to crank out 800 words during your lunch break. If that's the case, then that would be the schedule you should go with. Work on cranking out 800 words each day during lunch break. Now, once you have your first draft completed, it's time to look at revising your manuscript. Now, when it comes to the time frame between finishing your draft and going into revision, some writers are going to tell you you should take a break from your book. Go back to it with fresh eyes. But other writers like to dive right into revision once they've typed the end on their draft. Like most other aspects of writing, you're going to have to figure out what works best for you. Is it going to be better for you to let the manuscript sit a little bit, or do you want to jump right in and begin molding it? Personally, I'm one of the people that like to get into revision fairly quickly. I might give myself a day or two, but then I am back into the book, rewriting, fleshing things out, fixing all the issues. Now, the people who like to sit on their manuscript for a little while often talk about wanting to give themselves some distance so they can come in with fresh eyes. But for me, I don't like unfinished projects dangling in my life. But I also like staying close to the book, having the book continue to live inside me, and therefore it's easier for me to access all the ideas and feelings I was striving for. Now, once you know when you're going to start your revisions, you need to have a process by which to do it. The thing is rereading your book isn't really revision. There's a lot of different things that you need to be looking for. And how you develop your process by which you do that is, again, going to depend on what works best for you. So here I thought I'd give you a quick overview on how I set up my revision process. And the first thing I do when I'm ready to revise is to read through the manuscript. It's basically a macro view of the book. Now, during this read through, I'm looking for obvious errors in the content. And these are things like inconsistent names because, yes, I have accidentally changed characters' names in the middle of the book. But I'm also looking at the character development. Does the timeline work? Are there plot holes? How is the pacing and the continuity? During this pass, I'm also looking for obvious errors that have to do with spelling or grammar, punctuation, and the wrong word choice, such as to versus to, or there versus there. Now, during that first pass, I'm one of those people that will stop to flesh out a scene or add to it or maybe pull it out if I don't think it works. But I do try to read through it fairly quickly and have an understanding of how the whole book works together. On the next pass, though, I am going down a little bit deeper than that macro level to check that each scene has a purpose. Remember that everything that you're writing should tell us something about the character or move the plot forward. And I use this to help me make sure that I haven't written stuff that sounds really cool and I love, but it doesn't really need to be in the book. So I look to see that each of my scenes has at least one thing that has to do with either the plot purpose, the character's goal, some action that advances the plot, or some action that increases tension. And then I also look to see that there's two from this middle row that have to do with character development, a cause for character conflict, an effect, like a result of character conflict, that the stakes are being raised or that they're being reinforced. There are also a bonus list of things that the scene might have, and that includes things like backstory or world building, setting the tone or the mood, having the theme show up, or maybe even some foreshadowing. Now, it's really important to understand that in that bonus thing, you don't need all those things. And in fact, you don't need any of them. And you should be very careful that you don't have a scene that is only something from that bonus list. Your scenes should have also something that has to do with the plot or increasing tension or raising the stakes or developing the character. Now, in the olden days of revision, I would do several passes focusing only on one thing. So, for example, so far I've done the one pass at the macro view to make sure that the whole plot, everything works together, and if not, figuring out how to fix it. The next pass goes down to the scene level, making sure all those scenes need to be there and they're doing what they need to do. Then I would do another pass that would have to do with tightening up the prose. So that's getting rid of words that I don't need or finding stronger verbs I could use. And then there would be another pass. This might be finding all those adverbs that I don't need, and so on and so forth. But fortunately, for the next few things on our list that we need to check, there are tools such as Pro Writing Aid or AutoCrit, both of which I use, or maybe use Grammarly or some other editing software that can help you identify and fix the issues we're going to talk about next. So those first two passes were really focused on content, and now we're going to get down into how can I tighten up the writing and make it better. And the first thing that you can do to instantly improve the quality of your writing is to reduce or eliminate weak words. These are words that often aren't needed and often can take the oomph out of your writing. So the first thing that I would look at is weak and vague words. These are words like felt, took, gave, very, a lot, really, often, always, sort of, or kind of, and to be verbs. So these are like is, was, are, but they can also be like being. The next thing I look at are words that have to do with thought, sight, or hearing. So thought, realized, noticed, saw, heard, wondered. If you're writing in deep point of view, you don't need these words because the reader's going to know who is doing the thinking, realizing, and noticing. And then there's a whole set of other words that I kind of look for. Words like beginning and began, or starting and started, that, now, just. I have a tendency to use and, but, and so at the beginning of sentences when they're not reading. The use of well. And you also want to look at words up and down, because if you sit down, sitting is a downward motion. You don't need down. If you're standing up, standing is an upward motion. You don't need to add the word up. The next thing I go for are passive sentences. Now, I've done a whole video on passive voice because it isn't always wrong, but more often than not, it's going to weaken the quality of your writing. And so you need to learn when you're using it and how to really beef up the sentence and make it stronger. I will have a link to that video in the description below. Now, you've probably heard people talking about getting rid of adverbs, and it is true that in many, if not most cases, you can instantly improve your writing and make it more dynamic by using stronger verbs instead of adverbs. For example, instead of saying she walked quietly across the room, you could say she tiptoed. The next thing that you can do that can really beef up the quality of your writing that's fairly easy to do would be to reduce or eliminate your dialogue tags. I know an author who once wrote an entire book that did not have a single dialogue tag in it. And these are things like said, asked, retorted, or whatever you happen to use to describe how someone is speaking. Now, luckily, you do not have to go that far. You do not have to eliminate all dialogue tags. Now, if we consider the rule about showing and not telling, and we recognize that dialogue tags are a form of telling, now we can work on replacing that with something that's action or thought or feeling. Doing this helps you write in deep point of view, and I do have a video on deep point of view that can really help you write a very emotionally immersive experience for your readers. I'll have a link to it in the description below. So essentially, we have a little tutorial in the middle of this video. If you would like to have a copy of my revision checklist that outlines all these things, including those words that I try to reduce or eliminate, you can get a copy of it free at writewithheart.com. This checklist and a host of other cool tools and resources are free for Write with Heart members in our freebie resource library. And if you're not a member, that's okay too. You can visit writewithheart.com and you can join for free. And you'll have access to that library. Plus, you can create your own profile, start a blog, join our groups. We have weekly tips and industry news by email, and we have a weekly Zoom call for support and camaraderie. Okay, after that detour, let's get back to the next steps to do once you finish NaNoWriMo. And the fifth step is to get feedback on your book. Now, if you're not already in a critique group, which can be a great help to you during your revision, now is the time to join one, or at least find some people that will have fresh eyes that can read your book. Now, maybe you don't want to do critique, but you really should at least find some alpha readers. These are readers who are going to read your book for the purpose of giving you feedback for additional editing and revision purposes. This is not the beta reader, who's generally the reader who's going to give you reviews. This is before that. This is the reader who's going to read it and let you know what's up, what they didn't understand, what they loved. They're going to tell you your next steps in terms of revision and editing for your book. And I would encourage you to have some readers who are also writers who can give you some writing insight and tips, but also have some readers who are just readers who can give you their feedback on their experience of your book. And once your alpha readers or your critique group or whatever you're using to get feedback gives you that feedback, now it's time to go back and revise again. Now, once you have feedback, it's time to decide what has merit and what doesn't. And you have to do it in a way that's very objective, because critique can ouch a little bit. Now, I have a video that talks about how to accept critique, how to deal with it, how to know what you should work with and what you shouldn't. And I will have a link to that in the description below. And of course, the last thing you're going to need to do once you've completed all this revision is decide what is your book's future. Are you going to publish this book or not? And if you decide you want to publish, what route are you going to take? Are you going to try and get an agent and traditionally publish, or are you going to self-publish? And depending what you decide with that, you're going to have different next steps. Now, this is where the Romance Authors Organizer can help you. Now, this is a complete organizer from idea to published book, but it also has to-do lists for getting traditionally published or self-publishing. So that's it. Those are the steps you should take once you finish NaNoWriMo and you have a manuscript with which to work with. Now, if you have other tips for post NaNoWriMo to-dos, let me know in the comments below. Now, if you would like to read a text version of this video, you can do so at writewithheart.com, and I will have a link to it down below. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope that you found this information helpful, and I will be back with more videos to help you in your romance writing career, and I hope that you will be back to watch them. Until then, it is Jenna Harte wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.